Welcome back to She's Got Game. On this week's episode, I'm sitting down with social psychologist Marina Mayer. Marina is not only a very good friend of mine, but she also specialises in resilience and bodies at work. So we are talking all about how to start listening better to your body to help you show up better in leadership roles and performance, not only in sport, but in all areas of your life. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Marina Mayer, welcome to She's Got Game.
Thank you so much. So happy to be here.
Thank you for joining me, one of my absolute besties and the most badass woman I know. We are going to dive all into your background, starting with your experience with sport. Where did sport first enter your life?
Yeah, very early. So I had parents who were both very active and started swimming at age 3 and playing football, or in the US as we call soccer, quite early, which is, basically it's not really soccer at that point or football at that point. And then moved into more competitive sport from an elite athletics perspective quite late, actually. So when it became really centerpiece in my life was around age 12 or 13 when I started playing water polo. And then I became really serious about it in my mid-teens. And water polo was my main sport, but I continued swimming through that whole time.
For those who don't know much about water polo, can you just give us an insight into what that training is like when you got to that collegiate level?
Yeah, so I think collegiate sports in the US are unique in the sense that they really are like full-time jobs. And I played Division I in a school that was pretty much always in the top 3 in the nation. And so anyone who's playing in a program with kind of that level of athletes and commitment, it's going to be about 40 to 50 hours a week of training. So it really is that kind of full-time job. Lots of traveling, lots of films, double days, long hours, and especially in any sport where you lose that shape quickly, which is water polo is a specific type of conditioning with swimming. It takes a lot of hours in the pool to maintain that and work through the conditioning, the skill, the teamwork, all of those types of things. So it was very full on. And I also played a bit in the USA national team system, which meant sometimes nights and weekends traveling to balance both collegiate and USA team responsibilities.
What did that chapter teach you about yourself and how you operate under pressure?
That I can, really. I mean, I think this is what is so incredible about sports is that there's a lot of fear about stress. We carry a lot of fear about being stressed and challenged in ways that we can't handle. And there are a lot of stressors in society. But what I love about sport is that it creates an opportunity to develop a relationship with challenge and stress in a way that's really healthy. And so you can see things that push you to your limits as enhancing. And there's a lot of research around this as well. And it teaches you a level of strength and resilience and self-efficacy that I think is otherwise really hard to get to in your natural environment in a safe way. And so it developed this strength and self-efficacy in my identity that was very much a social one because I was on a team sport. So it's really connected to also support systems and working with others that I really carry with me today.
Were there moments during that time where you found yourself curious about the psychology with sport, or was it just very physical at that point?
Yeah, I don't have a lot of memories of thinking kind of intellectually too much about it, but I think what happens is there are such quick feedback loops between how people behave, how coaches coach, how team leaders lead or don't lead, and performance. There are rarely any other situations in this world when we get to see that type of feedback loop between how behaviors translate into performance, and then you get to iterate it and try it again. And so I think a lot of the team psychology, the leadership psychology, what works in terms of cohesion and culture and communication and adaptability in teams, these things just kind of get baked into athletes. And I think if you've been operating at that high level where you're so focused on how you're performing as a team and really problem solving that, you are learning those lessons in such an intrinsic way. It's not an explicit thought process. It's just this kind of exposure to what works and really what doesn't. And you see a lot of people learn what works because they experience what doesn't. They experience bad coaches, right? Or teams that are really disjointed and fall apart under pressure. And it's really easy to begin to intuit what goes wrong and what goes right when you're living it and feeling it day in and day out.
How did you then make that work with your team? If some of you were responding well to the coach and some of you weren't, how did you still stay so cohesive between you?
Yeah, that is a great question. I mean, I think the truth is that some people didn't respond well in those situations, or they were burned out coming into it. And so I had the benefit of starting late, having very low pressure on me because I wasn't someone who was picked out as the top recruit in the nation on a full ride scholarship. I was a surprising addition. I was recruited, but my coach didn't really think I was going to make a huge impact. And I surprised a lot of people in the way that I was able to operate at that level. And so there was not as much pressure on me. And so I didn't have the burnout levels coming in, whereas some of my other teammates that had been through a lot of high pressure to that point very early in their careers didn't have a lot left in the tank by the time they arrived in that really high pressure environment. So some people just didn't make it. And I remember so when we entered in our freshman year, the men's team had 17 freshmen join the team. By the time we were seniors, there were 2 left.
Wow.
And we had an amazing coach. His coaching style, I'm sure he's changed a lot and evolved a lot in how he's done it. But it was very intense and it didn't work for everybody. But for the people that did kind of survive it, there is some trauma bonding that happens where it creates cohesion because you're in it together. So I'm not sure if I answered your question there, but I think some years it worked and some years it didn't. It really didn't for us, and we really broke down in the kind of final stages of NCAA championships.
The part there that's really interesting to me is how if you've had exposure to high pressure quite young, that can lead to burnout and you then not actually ever reaching your full potential because the pressure's become too much. I experienced that. We spoke about this before, but
yeah.
I did running to the highest level at the time for my age, and I'd been experiencing a lot of pressure for a long time, and I initially thrived with it. And I would say I thrive under pressure now, but then it got to a point where the pressure was so much that I, in my head, almost built up that the pressure was more than it was from my parents, from my coaches. And then I had this fear of letting people down to the point where it did hinder my performance.
Yes.
Do you know much about why that can impact kids who have been in those environments for longer? Why is that?
That's such a good question. And I'm not a child psychologist, so this wouldn't be my area of expertise. But what I would say when we're talking about resilience and developing and growing skills and whole people to perform under pressure long term, there's 2 things that you need. You need nurture and you need challenge in order to develop resilience. And if you over-index on one of those things, you're not going to be as successful. So if you over-index on nurture with no challenge, you're actually going to have a real lack of confidence because kids and or adults are going to feel like they're not capable of accomplishing that much because they haven't experienced that kind of frustration tolerance and breakthrough that gets them to the point of really having their confidence built that they can handle hard things. And then if you over-index on challenge without nurture, people are going to burn out. And so it's that combination of keeping those things in check where you have enough resources and support to be able to handle the stretch. And that just takes attunement. And I think the problem with young children is that in sports context, a lot of adults and external systems will project a lot of pressure onto a child. That's very inappropriate for the level of development that athlete is at, right? Which it should still be about exploration and play and fun and a safe relationship with failure because failure is about learning, right? Versus an emphasis on perfection and performance at that stage.
I just remember having such a fear. It became a fear to the night before races, I'd be crying my eyes out so I wouldn't sleep. So then that obviously hinders performance to the point where I think I was probably about 15, hadn't run for a year because I was just like, I can't do this anymore. And I was at school and one of my teachers was like, we need you to perform in this athletics meet that we have. And I was like, I cannot. And I remember standing on the stairs, the entire year group above were coming in for their PE lesson. And I was just stood there having this argument with this teacher because of this petrifying fear. It was debilitating. I was like, I cannot put myself in the arena with this. I do not feel prepared to do it. But rewind 18 months. And I loved it. But what is your view on how much time we spend on strengthening our strengths versus bringing up our weaknesses? How do we get that balance right?
Yeah. So one of my favorite studies related to this is this experiment they did with speed readers. And they took a group of speed readers who were average, so above the normal population in terms of reading. They could read a certain number of words per minute. And then they took a group that were above average speed readers. So they could, and this is quantifiable because they can count the number of words per minute. And they both put them through the same training on speed reading to increase their skills. And I'm not going to remember the exact number for the first group, but I believe that the average speed readers improved their words per minute by about 30 to 33%. Just really good, right? The above average speed readers, do you want to take a guess?
Like 5 to 10?
858%. Yes. I know.
Oh my God.
Gobsmacking. And I think in my current life now in coaching a lot of leaders is you see there's so much emphasis and skill development around weaknesses. And we are wired to gravitate towards weaknesses as the place to focus instead of figuring out how do we productively apply our strengths better in each situation and then use other resources like people with those talents around us to be able to show up well in that moment. And so I think we are responsible for our weaknesses. We are responsible for the impact of our weaknesses on others, right? We can't write that off and go, well, I'm just, not diplomatic, so it doesn't matter the impact of my words on somebody else in that working environment, right? We're still responsible for the impact, but should we spend all of our energy sinking into trying to bring up the things that we're not naturally wired for? If you're looking at ROI, strengths is way better.
So I was recently on this course and there was a guy leading it called Stu McMillan who did some work with a sprinter called Dwayne Chambers. And it's the one time that he emphasized the weakness before the strength. So he was super speedy to the 60-meter mark. He was a 100-meter sprinter. And then the last 40 meters, he just couldn't maintain that top-end speed. So they spent a lot of time working on his last 40 meters, but it was to the detriment of his 60 meters.
Right.
So then he didn't manage, his goal was to make the Olympic final and he didn't manage to make it because his speed to 60 had reduced in sprinting terms by a lot. To us it's milliseconds, but a lot in sprinting, that he lost so much of his strength that even though they
cannibalized his performance.
Exactly. And when you hear examples like that in real time and how that can impact in athlete terms, their entire career and the one goal that they've had, it does make you think about how much time we should spend on weaknesses versus strengths.
Right.
How did your experience as an athlete evolve how you then coach others?
Oh gosh. I mean, I think as an athlete, you learn firsthand what is toxic and damaging from coaching, right? So there is an immediate concern for the whole person because you see performance as a direct output of a full human being. At least, well, yes, I think I would maybe healthy coaches, but for me, that was immediately intuitive. And so when I moved into coaching, I coached athletes for 10 years. I worked in spiritual formation and kind of faith context, helping hospital and army chaplains kind of work on their internal infrastructure for handling strain. I've coached executive leaders and built talent development programs. In all of these settings, the second that you lose sight of the whole human being, you're missing the equation, right? You're missing all the variables in the equation. And so that's where that nurture and challenge comes in. And I think the other thing that we touched on earlier is that I really see challenge and resistance and weakness and all these things are just interesting data. And I think it gives you a healthy relationship with failure if you've done your kind of shadow work around being an athlete and having your own failures and your own limitations. That allows you to have a really healthy, cozy relationship with failure and feedback that it comes from a place of curiosity and growth and opportunity instead of protection and being armored up against hearing something that maybe you aren't perfect. In sports, you know you're not perfect. You see it every day, all day, right? And so that healthy relationship with failure and feedback is your biggest growth edge.
For people who maybe haven't had much time in sport, so they haven't experienced that and become comfortable with that, do you have any tips for how they can become more comfortable with failure and feedback?
Yeah. Yes. it's put yourself in the position to do that, right? It starts with small things, and maybe your work context isn't the safest place to try that out. So maybe you try to learn a new skill. You pick up ceramics, or you go to an improv class, or you start practicing something in your relationships that you feel wobbly in doing in terms of communication. But it's just practice. It's really just putting yourself in that situation, noticing what comes up, and then being curious. And we'll talk a bit more, I'm sure, about body-based stuff, but being curious about the body signals and what that data is telling you. There's some type of protection technique that's happening, strategy that's not allowing you to go to those places. And we need our adult selves to kind of go back and help rewrite and reframe some of those strategies so that we're able to step into those spaces with a little bit more safety and a little bit more curiosity. And so, yeah, step 1, practice it. Step 2, get curious. And then step 3 is just practice it again, you know?
Curious is one of my favorite words.
Me too.
I think we've spoken about this so much, but it's just such a cool quality to have. You learn so much by asking questions.
Yeah.
But I don't feel like everyone allows their brain to go there. I feel like I don't know what your view on this is, but there are some blocks that sometimes people are so in their own world, in their own lane, that there's this fear of being curious because it highlights that they don't know everything.
Yeah.
Have you experienced that much with the people you work with?
I mean, it's everywhere, isn't it? We see it all around us. And even more importantly, I experience it in myself sometimes too. And that is, I think that's a very human thing, is to want to self-protect and build your identity on being good at something or knowing something or being right at something. And so it takes some courage and bravery to allow your identity to be one of a learner instead of a, I've had this mastered. And yeah, you see it a lot, but where you don't seem to see it is in elite spaces of experts. So when I run into and spend time talking with people who are absolutely brilliant in their field, huge expertise, athletes, people who have operated among the greats, they will be very quickly to tell you, oh, that's not my area of expertise, or, oh yeah, I mean, it was an honor to get to compete next to that person. They do this so well. They are very aware of their limitations, and they're very comfortable talking about them, and being curious and leaning into growth. And so I think for me, it's a sign of intelligence when someone is curious and says, oh gosh, I actually don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but I want to.
Yeah. It's like these people, other than that and kind of feeling safe with failure, are there any other common threads you see between athletes and these high-level execs in the organizational work that you now do?
Well, this is an interesting correlation, because actually in the US, I can't remember the exact statistic, but it's around 90% of all female CEOs were former collegiate or Olympic level athletes, elite athletes. And some of that probably has to do with like patriarchal norms of what it looks like to show up in leadership spaces. But I think a lot of it has to do with the ability to work with others, the ability to take on feedback, and that grit to push yourself and know that challenge is not a threat. And to lean into that, and to know how to resource yourself through that is a real skill. And that's what we really refer to as resilience, right? In those environments. So yeah, a lot of crossover there and a lot of transferable skills between athlete world and leading in other spaces.
Yeah, it is interesting because I totally agree with you on all of this. I think sport develops so much in us that leads to high performance outside of life.
Yeah.
And that's one of the reasons it's so magical. It brings people together, but it also allows people to really grow in whichever direction they want to go.
Yeah.
But I am aware that there are people who just don't have this experience with sport, and that's really scary to then try and develop these qualities. And I know we've touched on it previously already, but for someone who maybe doesn't quite have the confidence to fail just yet, or is scared to even put themselves in safe to fail environments to get that practice.
Right.
Are there any materials out there or anything people can read to kind of help develop that courage to start practicing failure and curiosity?
You know, I think the biggest key about this, what's so magical about sports, is that you're doing it in your body. Your whole self is participating in this. And so another place where this, I think, happens in a potentially even more vulnerable way is in the arts, in theater, in performance arts, in creating something, right? Nobody just is instantly an amazing painter or sculptor. And also the thing that's beautiful about art is that there is no such thing as perfect. And it's really about the art. It's about the process of creation versus achieving some type of output, right? And so I think there's a lot of value in these embodied ways of exploring edges of yourself that you're not comfortable with without an attachment to an outcome. Because the fear comes from a failure, it comes from some type of invisible standard of what an outcome is meant to be, right? And so if you can kind of step back into that childlike version of play and exploration to develop new ways of thinking, new ways of showing up, and new confidence in those spaces of ambiguity or discomfort. And Dr. Becky is a child psychologist who I absolutely love, and she talks about the key to resilience in children is frustration tolerance. And you see this with toddlers as they're learning, or young children as they're learning new skills, and they get frustrated because they can't get the block to fit, or they try to climb and they fall, or they're trying to do something that's, that they don't quite have the skill yet to do. They haven't quite figured it out. And the way to develop confidence and resilience in that child is to let them sit in the frustration of it a little bit longer. And so we have to develop our vulnerability tolerance, our frustration tolerance, and it does not have to be in sport. But I will say, if you are afraid of sports, maybe there is some way to uncouple in your mind movement from competitive sport and to engage in movement as a way of exploring this. So is there a dance class that you could go to? Could you try and learn how to garden? Would you want to try and learn how to boulder, right? That's like a completely different style of self-exploration that is very embodied and introduces a lot of this frustration tolerance and curiosity process into your life.
I love that. I haven't heard of that before, the frustration tolerance.
It's such a good, I steal it all the time in my work from Dr. Becky. She's, definitely look her up. She's amazing because there's so, I don't have children, but even listening to her work on child development, there's so much that you go, oh my gosh, okay, that explains it. And then you can kind of go back and understand yourself with a little bit more framing. And so, her work is amazing. But I love the frustration tolerance because we're so uncomfortable with frustration when we haven't gotten something right, especially if you're used to being good at stuff.
Yeah. When something comes so naturally and then you're like, why can't I do this really, what seems like a very mundane task? Why am I finding that so hard?
Yeah. Or like I played water polo my whole life. Then you saw me try to play tennis.
We got there, guys.
There is a learning curve, and you have to take your identity out of that I am an elite performer and put it into I'm a gritty learner. I believe in my ability to learn and figure things out. And when you make that identity shift, then all of that strength from your kind of areas of mastery and expertise translates into all the areas of vulnerability and new uncertainty.
This is amazing. I could honestly, every time we talk, before we started recording this, we're like, what's our hard stop? Because we could legit be here all day. Yeah. When you talk about movement moves us, what does that mean to you?
Yeah, it's a great question. Well, I'm going to back up a bit and just give some context on what this means. So I worked in the space as a practitioner for organizational development and developing leaders in corporate contexts for about 10 years after I coached for 10 years in athletic spaces. And one of the things I noticed when I moved from a space of coaching bodies and honestly working in other industries, kind of nonprofit industries, faith-based communities, there's a lot of body involvement in the ways that we communicate, build trust, make meaning, learn things, right? Recess for children is very important. Process trauma, all these things, the body is very involved. And then you get into the corporate context and everyone all of a sudden pretends that we are just like heads on a stick, that we are walking around without bodies and interacting without bodies. And so to the point where we actually really try to hide our biology in such huge ways. When I interviewed different participants for my research and I asked them, how does your body show up at work? They really named very few instances, like when I'm in a meeting where I'm back to back between meetings and I finally can't hold it any longer and I just have to excuse myself to go use the loo, or when I like squeeze in a lunch break because it's not socially acceptable to eat in a meeting, right? And so there are such small places where in knowledge work, our bodies are allowed to come to work. And so I noticed this jarring dissonance between kind of the way that corporate world treats performance and the way that I saw performance and cohesion and team culture and all these other spaces. And I got really curious about that and decided to research it. And so my research that you've referenced, my first piece of research was how movement moves us, really looking at, does movement do things for us beyond the physical? Does it facilitate social connection and trust, team cohesion? Can it facilitate better communication? How can movement facilitate cognitive processes like critical thinking and creativity, emotional processes like empathy, connection, authenticity, patience, right, in the way that we relate to people? And so I wanted to understand, we know that movement moves us physiologically. What's the knock-on impacts in all the other aspects of leadership processes, the cognitive, emotional, and social processes? And the long story short is that it does move us in ways that are non-physical. Even though, against all evidence, we really operate often in knowledge work context, like we're not bringing our bodies to work with us. And so that's really what my research was about, was digging into that question. About what would happen if we bring the body to work with us a bit more?
What does happen?
A lot. So I specifically studied women in leadership, so female leaders, and I looked at their relationship with leadership and their experience of leadership, kind of agnostic to movement. So before we introduced movement into the actual context of work. And the research shows, or my research showed, which what many other much smarter researchers' studies have shown, which is that leadership is exhausting, it's draining, it's high demand. It requires a lot of interpersonal and social attunement, as well as hard thinking, hard problem solving, balancing, resilience, all these things. And so these women had the same type of experience. They put their bodies into boxes when they were actually describing what it felt like to show up in a room where they're, one of the only women at the table, or when they're having to navigate a corporate environment while hiding or kind of minimizing their bodies to be credible in that space, or even safe, right, to not be sexually harassed in these different environments. And so there's a lot of contorting that happens because they don't match the prototype for what a leader is, right? If you think about a leader, or if you ask Google or AI what a leader looks like, right, it's probably going to be a white middle-aged man with the briefcase in a suit, right? There's a very particular image that's normative in our culture about who is in that space. And so the response to that for a lot of us is either imposter syndrome or contortion, right? Or we fight and fight and fight against that and then are penalized for it, right? And at some point you change your strategy. And so that's what a lot of these women reported. When we began to introduce movement into how they worked as a tool for cognitive and emotional and social processes a bit more, there was a huge shift in that. First, they reported showing up more present, more attuned to their environment, able to handle dynamically what's actually happening in the moment in their physical but also social environments. The ability to build immediate, trusting, authentic connections in a way that they had a harder time accessing before. And the ability to feel like they could take up more space. So there was this real emancipation from social and kind of power norms that said you don't belong here. And that seemed to be kind of gone from their thinking. And they reported actually physically feeling like they took up more space. Their spines felt longer. They felt more present and like they belonged in that space a lot more. And to me, that was fascinating because nothing about the environment changed. The only thing that changed is that we introduced some type of movement sequence in the middle of their working kind of environment. And so that to me was fascinating. And then of course, all the other effects that you would expect: more clarity, more creativity, more ability to problem solve, better energy, more calm, de-stress, all the things that we know kind of physiologically happen for us as well. And so the bottom line is that movement helped mediate every aspect of how they were showing up and performing in that space in a positive way.
What did that movement sequence look like that you had them doing?
Yeah, so in this particular research study, we did a female executive leadership workshop, and we used a couple different types of movement sequences. But when I talk about movement, it really is, it can be as small as moving your eyes, tapping, anything that helps bring you back into your body, sensory grounding, right? So moving through these kind of different exercises. We also did Pilates mat sequencing. We did some kind of shaking and loose dancing type things, as well as more repetitive things like squats and air squats and jumping jacks and those types of things. But it was really just about trying to match the movement to the moment and use that tool as a way to let the body really finish the work. And the practical breakdown of this is it can be any type of way to help you get back in your body in the moment when you're in your work environment. Quick walk around the block, some, stretching out the arms in the bathroom, anything along those lines.
We've spoken quite a lot about this before, but that study on exercise snacks, and I can't remember all of the ins and outs off the top of my head, but it's essentially like 10 to 20 seconds of maximum effort work. It was something like every couple of hours on the hour, 3 to 4 times a week.
Yeah.
Even if you did no other training, that pushed the needle with what's referred to as your VO2 max, which is a metric that we use for how healthy you are.
Right.
And it improved it. But also, I would be fascinated to know when you're exerting yourself at maximum effort, you're going for it, and you have to have confidence to do that because you know it's going to be tough.
Right.
But B, the impact that has on your nervous system, it fires you up.
Yes.
So I would be fascinated to see how a study like exercise snacks actually improves not VO2 max, but performance at work. Because when we've gone back and forth about this, we've spoken about power movements like a med ball slam or boxing or something really explosive.
Yes.
On the morning of having a big presentation or meeting that you've got to lead.
Yes. I love this because I think bodies are talked about at work in the space of wellness and de-stressing. And that is needed. It's rightly so, right, that we're talking about that because there is a lot of burnout happening. There's a lot of stress. But I think it really is reductive in the sense that the body facilitates not just de-stressing, but also meeting the moment in terms of power. All of that is neurochemical, right? So movement can unlock the transmitters that we need to access different parts of our brain, more neuroplasticity, more focus, more creative thinking. And so thinking about the body as a tool, not just to lower and regulate your nervous system down, but to also gently mobilize you up into a space of higher performance when you're feeling stuck or sluggish is fantastic. So I woke up this morning, felt sluggish, and my routine included, I did some like lymphatic drainage, which I just learned from the internet, right? This stuff is really available to us these days. I did some dry brushing and I bounced on a trampoline for 2 minutes to help flush out and get my lymphatic system moving. And I turned on bright lights overhead and I looked up, which is a way to help activate the brain in terms of it's time to wake up. It's more cortisol, right? We're getting us moving. And then this evening, or if I have a really stressful moment, I might do something opposite. So I might do breath work that focuses on the exhale. Just like that. Help bring myself down, lower my lights, turn off the overhead light. A lot of this is just evolutionary, right? Bright light overhead tells us it's morning, right? Orange light, that's low, tells us it's sunset, and it helps our body prepare to be in that moment. And so there's ways that we can hack that and use that when we need to either rev up or slow down in our own nervous system on a daily basis as well.
I want to just quickly touch on the trampoline because Marina and I used to live together and she bought this trampoline and it's the
Ridiculous.
best toy we ever had in the house. But anyone can buy this. It's not huge. It's not like you've got this big in the ground trampoline. We didn't have a garden either, did we? We had a terrace and what you call a side yard, which I have totally adopted as a Brit, the word yard. But just this small trampoline you can fit in your bedroom.
Yeah, 30 pounds.
Yeah. Simple. How often or long would you recommend someone doing that to get actually some kind of adaptation and impact?
Yeah. I think the research shows that it's 2 to 5 minutes helps with something called the glymphatic system and the lymphatic system. So the glymphatic system is something that works overnight to flush all the toxins out of your brain. It takes about 7 to 8 hours minimum. So you have to be asleep, and it works best when you're side sleeping, apparently. And it's just this like rinsing that happens of the brain to help flush all the toxins out. And then in the morning, it kind of clears out and you experience the benefits of that kind of mini detox. The sleep is so restorative for us in so many ways. Rebounding helps stimulate the glymphatic and lymphatic system. So it just helps get all that stagnant fluid and toxins moving and processed through the liver and out of your body. Now, I'm a little bit outside of my wheelhouse here because this is physiology world and I'm a social psychologist. But from what I can tell, 2 to 5 minutes, I feel connected, sharp, my brain's working. Similar to if you were like kind of bounce a ball against a wall for a couple of minutes, anything that requires coordination is also going to wake up a different part of your brain. So sometimes my co-founder and I, when we're going for a walk and trying to work a hard problem and we want to be in sync on it, we'll take a ball with us and we'll just bounce it back and forth as we're walking. And the flow that we get in terms of critical thinking, creativity, synchronization is phenomenal. It's so much more effective than sitting across the table from each other.
I remember the first time you brought a ball on one of our walks. And I was like, this is the best thing ever.
It's so fun.
I want to do this all the time.
It's back to the play stuff, right?
Yeah.
Letting ourselves be a bit more playful in how we engage with work. Yeah.
Something else you've spoken about is body intelligence. What is that and how can someone start developing it?
Yeah. So there was a lot of interest in the last 20 years in EQ. It's kind of the big thing. And it's very important, right? But emotional intelligence starts from some type of data, right? We have to have some type of data to tell us, I think I'm feeling this way. And that usually comes from the body sensations. And so just to give you a picture of kind of what's happening, they estimate that our conscious mind can handle 40 to 50 bits of information per second. It's a lot. But the body is sending 11 million bits of information per second to the brain. And that's coming from two sources. There's something called exteroception, which is our external environment. So right now I'm taking in, I have peripheral vision. I can see you. I'm hearing my own voice. I can hear a little bit of a fan, all sorts of sensory inputs that I'm conscious of and not conscious of. My body is reading your micro expressions, your body posture, any erratic noise that might be coming from somewhere else when I'm walking down the street. That's all data that's flooding in every second that my body is processing. And then there's interoception, which is all the signals and data that's coming from our internal body to our brain every second. Some of this we don't need to know and we'll never know. It's my kidneys talking to my brain. Fine, they've got that covered. My conscious mind doesn't need to know what's happening there, right? But there are other signals that are coming up that we're interpreting. I'm hungry. I have a knot in my stomach. I feel a bit like weird in my fingers. There's a lump in my throat, right? We have these ways of describing body sensations that are actually where we get our emotional intelligence from. And so a lot of psychotherapists, when they're working with clients that don't have emotional intelligence, will start at the body level. Where do you feel this in your body? And then try to place words around that to describe the emotion that that sensation is indicating. And so body intelligence is about two things. It's about knowing how you show up in space, how other people perceive you, and being able to read their body intelligence, right? Hey, I'm noticing that you're leaning back. Are you still processing information? Do you need more time? Do you have some thoughts? I'd love to hear them, right? So reading people's body language and being able to call that forward as a leader or just interpersonally in any type of relationship. And then knowing your own signals. I'm feeling some type of hesitancy or gut signal here? What's that about? And so for me, body intelligence is just starting further upstream. It's getting the whole picture. It's beginning to de-bias some of the shortcuts that we've made over the years to understand what's happening earlier and how can I rewrite maybe my gut is going crazy about this, but actually in this situation, I don't need to have my guard up so high. My boss is just trying to give me feedback. I'm actually not under threat. So I can rewrite that story and interrupt it so I don't show up defensive every single time my boss has some feedback on the deck that I just did, right? And so it gives us the ability to have a lot more impact and a lot more intelligence. And this is going to become, especially, this is my prediction or my hunch, body intelligence is going to become the most important type of full intelligence that we're bringing in the age of AI. The world of work is changing at a astronomically rapid pace, and we don't exactly know what the impact of AI is going to be. But as artificial intelligence surpasses human intelligence, what makes us human, the value that we bring, it's going to live in our bodies. And at least until AI is some sort of embodied, that is an area that I think is the next frontier for us in work.
It's really interesting because what we used to do a lot, if we ever had anything that we wanted to talk about at home, we'd be like, hey, if you've got 5 minutes, can I just talk to you about something?
Yes.
And it could be anything. And I remember the way you approached that was so great because you wouldn't dive in. You'd go, can you tell me when you have 5 minutes of your time? Which first of all is so respectful and you're aware of everyone around you. But then we would dive into it. And I would always come away feeling better for having had a conversation with you about whatever's going on in my life and vice versa. And we really created that safe space. How important is it to make sure you feel safe with the person you're having these conversations with if you are voicing feelings that are coming up in your body?
Yeah. That's a really good question because we are going to be in environments all the time where we're going to have to communicate a fully integrated thought or boundary or preference with people that maybe we don't feel safe with, but maybe that's the point, right? And so I think if you're letting somebody's influence in to help rewrite and reframe some of that stuff we talked about that's earlier upstream, it should be someone either that you really trust or that you're able to filter their feedback based on, hey, how are you experiencing me right now? And then you take a moment to say, just because they've said they are experiencing me in this way doesn't mean that that's actually my identity, right? But it is interesting data about how they're experiencing me and perceiving me. And so in that way, even people that we don't trust can give us really important data about how they're experiencing us, or people that we don't get on with give us really interesting data about our edges, right? Because I adore you. You're never going to bring out my edges in the same way that somebody that brings out my edges will, right? And so that person's going to have very different feedback from me. And it doesn't mean that that's going to shape my identity or sense of self, but it is important data. And so I think it's about what you let in. And it is really important to have those safe people to let in those moments.
Yeah. How can workplaces do better at creating space for that kind of authentic and embodied leadership?
Well, this is true about any type of change. If it doesn't start with the leadership, it's not going to go anywhere. So no team is going to, or organization is going to outpace the shadow sides of the people in positions of power. So you have to have leaders that are willing to do this work themselves, or at least give space for other people to do it in a safe way. And so I would say it starts with you. It starts with the people in the positions of leadership. It starts with you showing up and seeing if there's space for that there. And then there's ways that there can be policies and systems put in place and ways that learning can be designed to be more embodied. This is where my consultancy work really comes in, is how can we design change from a behavioral science perspective that includes the reality of physical environments and bodies so it actually sticks. But I think for people listening to this, I would just say start right where you are, which is with you.
Yeah. And then something else that people can hopefully develop more, which we spoke about already, is resilience. How would you summarize resilience in a term, if you had to summarize it within a couple of sentences that really hit home with people? What is resilience?
Yeah. So my definition of resilience is the ability to expand your capacity through challenge. Deb Dana is a psychotherapist who wrote a lot on polyvagal theory. And if we want to get geeky, we can dive into that next. But she talks about the essence of resilience is the ability to return to regulation. And what I love about that is not only is it kind of scientifically based in terms of how our nervous system is working, but it's not about not getting off kilter. It's about how do you resource yourself to get back to a place of regulation and home base? And how do I do that in a way that's agile and quick, right? How do I get back on my own 2 feet? And it's because we're meant to be stressed every once in a while, right? If someone slams on their brakes in front of you and you don't have an adrenaline reaction, you're not going to survive that, right?
Yeah.
There's a reason why our nervous systems allow us to go into these fight, flight, and freeze states. But the key to the resilience is the ability to regulate back into that kind of window of tolerance in the middle, which is where we have access to all of our social openness, clarity, creativity, complex problem solving, agility. That's the agile part of your nervous system. And that's where you want to be most of the time. And so we're going to ramp up and we're going to slow way down to rest and digest and kind of numb out for a bit. But we need to be able to get back into that space. And that agility is really the essence of it.
Okay, let's geek out because I love a little geek out.
Right.
Tell us more about, is it polyvagal theory, did you say?
Yes.
Tell us more about it. How did you first come across it? What are some of the key take homes from this
So
theory?
I first came across it talking to an executive coach and psychotherapist. I'd come across it before, but the most clear conversation I had about it was how this executive coach and psychotherapist uses it in his work and he works with very established leaders of, huge Fortune 500 companies. He's wrote an amazing book, by the way, called The Contemplative Leader. His name's Patrick Boland. And he and I were having this conversation about bodies and work. And he said, I really think you should dig into polyvagal theory. And so that's where I got into some of Deb Dana's work. And essentially what Deb Dana and a lot of people who work in polyvagal talk about is there's three aspects of our autonomic nervous system, which is the thing that's kind of running behind the scenes and controlling your heart rate and all the physiological response to your environment. The first part of our nervous system was formed like 500 million years ago. And this is the freeze response. This is survive by immobilizing. Maybe the threat won't see me. Play dead, right? And for me, this looks like doom scrolling on my couch. This looks like my delivery bill going up. This looks like less social engagement. It's that kind of numbing, shut down, overwhelm, don't move, kind of stuck feeling. Then next came the fight flight response. And this is that fish that's darting around, right? So and this is a kind of a ramped up response. This feels more manic. This feels narrow focus. This feels action oriented. This feels more ramped, right? And maybe more stressed, okay? It's kind of more buzzing, but less peripheral vision. You can kind of feel that maybe in your body if that lands. And for me, this looks like more black and white thinking. This looks like moving really fast, forgetting to eat, forgetting to go to the bathroom. I haven't drank water all day, right? I've had a lot of coffee. Like this
was you, by the way, about 7 months ago.
Yeah. Oh no. Yes. This is I am not immune to any of this.
And also me on the reg, by the way. Let me just put myself in that.
Listen, those who can't play, teach. So this is where I got into this. But so that's the kind of fight flight. And then in the middle, you feel connected to yourself and others, open, alert, curious, creative, able to hold nuance, right? You're able to move fast, but you're also able to slow down. So that's what we call window of tolerance. That's that middle space. And that's the last part of the nervous system that kind of came online in evolution. And that's what we really want to have access to is all three of those states to access our full self because they all play a role. And so I love doing this exercise with people because we'll put up like 3 whiteboards and we'll say, describe what the state feels like to you. And this is how you begin to develop body intelligence, to go back to that. And so I'm curious, like for you, what does your freeze, survive by immobilization state feel like? Like, does your delivery bill go up like mine does? What does it show up for you?
For me, when I freeze, I isolate.
Isolate.
And that was the word that was coming to mind when you were describing all of your things. I was like, to me, that's me isolating myself. I see my friends less.
Yeah.
I see the people who know me the best less, because I know they will spot something in me that I'm not yet ready to unpack or change.
There's an avoidance behavior there.
Exactly. Yeah.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. How do you feel it in your body? Do you feel it in your body?
I do. And when I went to therapy, I was thinking of this when you were talking. I remember some of the first things she'd say is, where is this coming up? What does that feel like in your body right now? So when I'm in freeze state, it's chesty. It's quite, throaty. Like if I'm feeling frustration or panic, maybe this isn't my freeze state, but if I'm on the verge of tears, there's pain in my throat, and it's almost like 'cause I'm trying to suppress them. And I love a cry, but it shows up in my throat.
Yes.
But I think in freeze state, it's this like anxiety that feels like it's building up through my body. It's getting hot. Like imagine you're in one of those chambers, and it's filling up with water.
Yes. That's that flooding, overwhelmed feeling.
Yeah.
Literally. Yeah.
But
flooding.
I'm stuck. I can't get out of the chamber. That's how I feel.
Constrained, like the walls are closing in. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Really amazing description. And then if you think about moving fast, manic, stressed, pressure, high pace, what does that feel like for you?
That's my day to day. That for me, one of my really good friends, Mel, who I think you've met, we lived together about 6 years ago, and COVID then hit, and we would go for a walk. And Mel is the most chill, like she would walk backwards. Yeah. And I would practically be running. She said to me, going for a walk like you is like walking a dog. You've done 3 times the amount of steps I have because you've run up some stairs. I've gamified it, but I'm also like, let's go. Like, what's the rush? We're in COVID. Like, we've got nowhere to be. So for me is just, how do I describe this? As things come in, the overwhelm is the constant with both of these for me. But I'm like, I need to get back to that now. I need to do that now. I need to do that now. My brain can't process. It can't hold on to information for as long.
Yes.
So it has to go on a list, or I have to do it then.
High activity.
Yeah,
bias action, compulsivity.
Busy brain.
Scattered, busy brain.
Nothing is getting executed to my best ability because I'm trying to do too many things at once.
Yes. So lack of prioritization and clear thinking in that way.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's so helpful to describe these states because this is body intelligence. So the more that you understand what they feel like, then you can go, I'm moving really fast right now. I'm feeling pressure to do a million things at once. So I think I'm in fight flight. So I think I need to down regulate a bit. How do I slow myself down? Can I do some exhales? Can I go for a walk? Can I find some sensory grounding? Do I need just like a cup of warm tea? What can I do to help use my body and my senses to signal safety? Can I listen to some bird song, right? That signals safety for us because birds don't sing when predators are around. So if you ever feel relaxed around bird song, that's why. Can I get into nature? How do I help gently mobilize myself down without completely overshooting and dropping into complete overwhelm, stuck avoidance, right? Because that's what we usually do is we overshoot. And so it's about knowing how to gently shift change. And then same thing when you're stuck. How do I gently mobilize? Regrounding. Maybe it's a little walk. Maybe it's a little gentle dance in the kitchen, right? Maybe it's a hug from a friend to help me get out of stuck, right? Maybe it's someone to sit next to me while I deal with the overwhelm, a body double, which is, a neurodivergent's favorite.
We used to do that all the time.
All the time.
And the 20-second hugs.
20-second hugs, exactly. So using those tools, thinking of if you're stuck in your head, how can I use my body to get back to a place of regulation? And the more that you have the intelligence to notice what's happening in the moment and then resource yourself, that's the essence of resilience right there.
So are you saying basically that the nervous system is so powerful when it comes to how we respond to pressure, recovery, performance? So we got to nurture that nervous system, get it to our optimal state. And using movement and our bodies is one of the most powerful ways to get us into that place.
Yes. And I think in sports, we've learned this, right? Djokovic got loads of press at Wimbledon for doing that diaphragm breathing. He was leaning back in his chair and he's doing this. He's activating kind of the diaphragm. he was down regulating because he was frustrated, right? He was feeling, that vision. I'm extrapolating here, but he has talked about diaphragm breathing as a way to self-regulate some of his emotional kind of intensity to bring him back into a place of clear-mindedness and performance and focus. This is accepted in the world of sports now. Where we don't see it is in corporate environments. And so my big hunch is that sports has figured out that the mind and the body are inseparable when it comes to how we navigate pressure and stress. And I think corporate has only just kind of realized, corporate America and knowledge work, that yoga and breath work can help in certain settings, but that is such a reduction of what the body can actually do for us. It's like the difference of having a really big meal before you do a big endurance event and then trying to fuel up afterwards. If you didn't have any fuel at all, you wouldn't be able to do that, right? So exercising in the morning or doing like body-based breaks from work, that's helpful. Of course it's helpful. Oh my gosh, yes. But imagine if you're fueling all the way through, how much more you can accomplish and how much less exhausted you're going to be on the backside, right? How much more you're going to have left in the tank if you just gave yourself micro-fueling, exercise snacks, movement snacks, sensory snacks throughout the day to make sure that you have access to your most regulated, resource, and resilient self.
3 hours.
3 hours.
I love that. So someone listening to this might be going, right, I am 100% implementing this. Why would I not?
Right.
But it's quite difficult for me to either leave my desk or leave my desk for too long. What are some simple movements they can do that are effective to gain these benefits we've been talking about today?
Yeah. So I would say let your body be the teacher. So you're probably already doing things that is doing this for you. You probably already know that hearing birdsong and going for a walk in nature helps you, or that having that like spicy chai right before an important meeting helps you lock in because there's something sensory about that, or that, fill in the gaps. When I do this with leaders and I say kind of fill out a sheet, I want you to journal when you feel most connected to self, clear, energized, focused, connected to others. You have that kind of ideal state list. Get really sensory, really explicit about what's happening, what you've done that makes you feel that way. They've got a list. They can pull it. And describe what happens when you have days when you feel completely disconnected to self, uncomfortable in your own skin. And they're like, I've sat at my desk all day. We did a strategic offsite where we didn't move. They have a list of that as well. And so let your body be the teacher first. This is a bottom-up drill. We are listening and learning from our bodies, and that will help you attune to what's actually happening, what I actually need. Because the first step is body-based intelligence, somatic intelligence. What's happening and what do I need right now? What is my body telling me? And how can I resource it? So getting that clarity first, which is just taking the moment to check in, maybe write down, notice, step 1. Step 2, try some stuff, play, notice, right? So there's loads that I could prescribe, but the most important thing is that what worked for me this morning may not be what I need tomorrow. Last night I was so exhausted. I went to the gym and I just wandered around in circles until I finally realized I actually just need a sauna and like a really light swim. I don't need to do power movements tonight. I'm just too tired. It's not going to actually help me. And so there is a role for discipline and top-down kind of prescription of movement. And there's also, in this space, it's about developing that skill of connecting to what is my body telling me and how can I partner with it to get there.
The other thing I want to talk about, so Marina and I, for context, have some geeky conversations. And one of our latest ones was on constraints-led approach.
Yes.
Can you explain to our listeners what that is? And then how have you thought about using that with your own work and in leadership?
I've only recently discovered this. But I don't think this is going to be surprising to anybody to hear about this. It's based on ecological dynamics, which is a long way of saying of a look at how the body interacts with our environments and then how that drives our psychology and how we show up in that space. So the people that practice constraint-led approach, and I learned about this because of things that like Steph Curry, they're doing in the NBA, they're doing in Premier League, it's showing up in sports. So kind of from research straight into sports, ways of developing skills in athletes that are different than copy this movement 1,000 times, take the same shot from the 3-point line 1,000 times until you perfect the movement. It debunks muscle memory. So what it's saying is There's no such thing as muscle memory. What you need to develop is your body's ability to discover a way through, a way to perform the skill in dynamic environments, because we are always taking in that 11 million bits of information that are coming in and then forming a response unique to that environment. There's no such thing as stepping into the same stream twice when it comes to performance. So what we're trying to develop is a much more dynamic skill of truly reading the room, right? And then finding a way through. And so constraints-led approach does this by creating more constraints in the environment to force the athlete to be more creative and skilled in figuring out how to do the thing that they're being tasked to do. So for instance, you could be playing on a much smaller court. You could have, there's a WNBA player who is one of the best in the league. She's 5'8", and her training involves putting a couple of men who are 2 to 3 times her size. I mean, they're just huge, massive men that she has to break the screen and get around them. They're creating huge constraints for her, and her ability to spot the way through and her self-efficacy and believing that she can. Practice is harder than the games. So by the time she gets in the games, her skill for seeing a way through screens is so much more effective than it would have been if she had been practicing in a non-constrained approach. And so it's about creating dynamic environments and then tapping into teaching people how to learn and discover rather than copy a movement pattern.
Do you feel like this creates more sustainable change?
Yes, because what you're doing is you're preparing someone to navigate any environment. And this is my big beef with leadership training. You can't learn how to lead in a dynamic, evolving environment only from a webinar or a book, because without constraints, you're never going to see what comes up in your nervous system. You're never going to notice how you actually show up in real environments. And you're never going to have that opportunity to learn from that failure and grow. And so, for instance, we designed some safety training for a blue collar company that was working with really hazardous chemicals. And they needed to onboard people and get them safe quickly. And so rather than just teaching them about exothermic chemical reactions from a PowerPoint deck, we created simulations that were safe of what this would look like. So we did, Mentos and Diet Coke explosions. We used paintball guns to teach their natural physical reactions to something splashing up at them. And they realized, when they had paint splatter all over their necks, that they would have gotten burned by the nitric acid. And so we used visceral, experiential, constraint-led training to teach people not only the concepts, right, of what's actually happening, but to train their reactions in the dynamic moment so that they have confidence when they walk into a real situation where there may be a real chemical reaction that may splash up, that instead of lifting their chin and exposing their neck, they're going to drop their chin and use their face shield. And that's the type of training that happens all the time with firefighters, with pilots, but we're not using it in corporate environments. And so that's what we're trying to do with bringing the body a bit more into the way that we design change and learning interventions.
How could people use that in the corporate environment? Have you got some examples, people wanting to have a play with this and test this with their team, maybe in more of a safe to fail way before they then take it out into, let's call it the real world, but doing some practices and some team exercises?
Yeah.
What could that look like?
Yeah. So one of the projects that I work on is an amazing example of this. And I didn't create this. It's been around for about 18 years. The goal of the program is to teach better deal negotiation skills in a rapidly changing environment. And so the people who created this program used live actors to simulate a deal environment. And then we compress the time. We throw a bunch of strangers into the process together. And we essentially push them into the deep end because it's a very safe environment for them to fail. There's no performance metrics around this. And we say, navigate this deal with live actors. It's completely dynamic. And as coaches, we observe how they're showing up. And we work with them as kind of flies on the wall throughout the day, and then coaching them in the evenings about how they showed up that day and how they want to change it. And so they have this really quick feedback loop to realize how they show up in constrained environments and then practice showing up a different way the next day. And the transformation that happens from that experience is phenomenal.
Whilst you're on this, I just want to mention your company, Sway. And for anyone listening who would like to reach out to you, can you just let them know some info on how to do that? Because I can imagine there are listeners who are fascinated by this right now and would like some help with that coaching in these environments.
Yeah. So Sway is a social psychology consultancy. So we use social science research methods to affect change in organizations. And our main area of expertise is resilience. So if you're going through turbulence, mess, change, M&A, AI transformation, any space that requires a change in how you show up, we help organizations navigate that better. And we also do executive coaching and leadership advisory as well. And so essentially, but I would just love to talk to anybody that would want to talk to me. So you can probably drop my email in the comments and we can set up a chat. But it might also be a good time to plug a little bit of the work that we've been talking about doing. So Sway has a little offshoot that is more dedicated to kind of the community and research and curiosity side of bodywork called Soma. And in the new year, we're going to be designing some events, and we have asked Tess to collaborate with us on designing movement patterns, like we talked about, everything from de-stressing and self-attunement all the way to power and showing up. And we're really excited to launch that and bring it, because this stuff sounds very esoteric and like abstract and hard to apply, but it actually is super practical, and it just takes a little bit of experience to understand, how do I get practical and how do I do something with that? And so we want to start creating these community events for people to come to and learn, how do I start becoming more embodied in work and bringing my body to work on a daily basis?
I think that's it, isn't it? It's because it all sounds incredible and makes so much sense when you're listening. But that's why I've asked for some examples here, so that people can go, okay, cool, that's how I implement that.
Yes.
Because they'll totally be on board from listening. But then sometimes it can be difficult to connect the dots on, how do I bring this theory into my everyday life and make it practical.
Yeah.
A lot of this as well, I can imagine, helps people shift their identity. You've spoken about how people may view themselves as one thing and then they can shift their identity into something else. What do those transitions tend to bring up for people who have managed to shift that identity?
Yeah. So for athletes, this is, I see this a lot with people who leave the military or people who leave elite athletics, right? Which there's always going to be a shelf life on elite athletics in some sense, right? You're going to move from being the athlete to the coach. Even if you stay in that world, there is some type of change for most people in how they're showing up in that space. And this is one of the harder transitions in terms of career and identity that I've seen, is in the athlete community. I transitioned from sports, being an athlete, into working a lot earlier than a lot of my teammates. A lot of my teammates were Olympians, and so they had several rounds of Olympics to get through before they began to make this transition into a different kind of vocation in their late 20s or early 30s. But I think the essence of the transition is first just acknowledging the loss. It's a big loss, right? When something has been a part of your world, your community, your sense of self, your daily routine for so many years, and then you go from that place of mastery to a place of rookie, feeling like a rookie in a new environment, there is a real sense of loss there. And so there's that to acknowledge. The second thing is that there's a real neurochemical change. Like when you're working out 8 hours a day and your whole focus is on physical performance and peaking that, really optimizing your physical performance, and then you transition into something that is much more sedentary and seated, your brain is changing, right? You don't have the same neurochemical makeup that you did. And that change can happen very abruptly. And that is very disorienting for athletes who are used to having a really different neurochemical makeup in how they show up in the world, and then trying to figure out how they still fit it in and squeeze it in and carry parts of that identity forward. And so just want to acknowledge that that's a big shift. And then in terms of what you can carry forward, I think it's about reframing what it was about that identity that was so important to you. So for me, that's looked like, I've got a lot of grit. I'm a really good team player. I'm capable of more than I think I am. I know that I can learn really well, right? So being kind of from an underdog type position where no one expected much of you, not in a big sports school growing up, carrying those feelings of self-efficacy, the learnings, that sense of identity that's transferable into your new setting is really, really helpful. And then finding ways to stay connected. you know, seeing my teammates, spending time with you, signing up for, you know, an Ironman relay when you have no business doing that, those types of things.
We totally have business doing that. Okay?
We do. We'll see you on the podium in a year.
But this will be an underdog thing.
Yes.
Because no one expects it.
No one expects it.
We love that.
Yeah.
We love an underdog.
I know we do. I mean, the people might expect it from you.
I was always going to say,
but
you're a collegiate level athlete. You're like the most insane swimmer ever. For anyone like that can't even put this into context right now, Marina is like legit, like Olympic level.
Well, I wasn't Olympic level.
No, you pretty much were.
But I trained with them every day.
Exactly.
And that was a joy.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So Marina is the real
deal. To get your butt
deal.
kicked by Olympians every single day is just a real... That's where the humility comes from. Yeah. Yeah. But anyway, so it's important to find ways to reconnect to that and see what you can carry forward. And I think the biggest part of my identity that I'm proud of is that it's not fixed. And I think when you can embrace that your identity is that you evolve and that you grow, then that goes with you wherever you go.
What do you hope the next generation of leaders understands about performance and just being human?
I hope that we shift our focus from performance perfection to resilience. And I think it's going to be even more and more needed as quickly as the world is changing these days. Because you talked about the crushing impact of having such focus on performance as perfection and as a standard. And versus a more longitudinal view of how do you perform and remain whole and not have it cannibalize the rest of your capacity for being emotionally healthy, for showing up in relationships, these types of things. And so I think if we can shift off of the myth that we can perform perfectly all the time and focus on our ability to expand our capacity to perform and meet the moment as the moment requires, that's a lot more sustainable approach to performance. In any aspect of life.
Because, I mean, just hearing you say this, for people listening that are maybe almost at that point of going, okay, this has gone too far now, to the point where I can't do this anymore. It's the one what if I have in my life, is what if I hadn't hit that point of debilitating fear and pressure that I could have continued? Could I have been in the Olympics? Could it have gone that far? And because I was on that trajectory, when I put it bluntly, like if I'm always on the verge of like, I hate saying things that could ever make me sound arrogant, but objectively, that was the path I was on.
Right.
But it got too much for me that I couldn't. And I, for years, I hated admitting it got too much for me because it made me feel like I was a failure.
Yeah.
But actually I was a 14, 15-year-old kid who thrives under pressure up to a point.
Yeah.
And it took me a long time to realize that up to a point bit. How can people catch themselves before it's too late?
Well, first of all, I just had to resist interrupting with a joke about the percentage of Brits who think that they'll qualify for the next Olympics if they just trained. You are actually the one Brit that I know that is true. And I don't mean just because of Brits. I just mean that's where the study was conducted.
No, it was wild. For anyone listening, it was post-Olympics last year and the percentage was so high. It was insulting.
It was 25%.
It was insulting
of adults.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. Whoever voted for that, you need to check yourself so hard. It's not that easy.
If you get even close to the top, you realize how far you are. It is just, it's unbelievable. But when I have talked about that study with friends jokingly, it's like the number of people who think they could land a plane. I do always qualify. I actually do know one British person who, if they took that survey, it is true and it's Tess.
That's the biggest compliment I've ever had on this podcast.
Yes. Let's get you training on that high jump. What was the question? So I think it's difficult because everyone that's listening to this podcast, not everyone, a lot of people who are listening to this podcast are full-fledged adults. And what's really hard about, and so natural about your story of going, how could I have interrupted that, is that you were still a child, right? And so I think it's really more for the people who are in positions of coaching and in positions of authority in sports that are working with youth, that they have a stewardship responsibility to take care of the athlete long term. And if you have a short-term mindset about trying to get a 14-year-old to perform at next week's meet instead of what their trajectory as an athlete will be in the long term, that's about your ego. You've got an identity deficit that you need to solve, and that 14-year-old should not fill that gap for you. So if you can't handle loss of your short-term objectives as a coach, and you're willing to compromise the mental health, physical health, longevity, joint strength of the athletes that you're working with, you shouldn't be in that position. Or that's maybe too reductive. It's tempting, but we have to be responsible and accountable for that if we're in positions of leadership. Mm-hmm. And honestly, the same is true in any position of leadership. We have to be good stewards of the power and the authority that we've been given to make sure that we're looking out for not just the short-term returns, which are important. There is accountability for that, but also keeping a longer-term perspective on what's sustainable and what does a long-term win look like here.
Always play the long game.
Always play the long game. Life is long, babes.
Life is long. That's the best bit of advice my mum has ever given me. Yeah. Life is long.
Yes.
And it was when she was telling me to break up with someone. Don't spend it with the wrong person.
But you need that long-term perspective. Yeah, that's a real life is long coaching bit there.
Just one last bit on this. So earlier we were talking about nurture versus challenge when it comes to this level of kind of a bit too much pressure when it comes to performance. As an individual, how can you take some autonomy? Excuse my brain is obviously scrambled and still jet lagged.
Yeah, autonomy and authority. Authoritative autonomy. Let's do it.
I love that. There we go. How do we recognize in ourselves when we may have tipped too far one way?
That's a great question because we are responsible for that. Actually, nobody else can do that for us, right? We have to do that. And we may not have control of our external circumstances, but we always have control of our response. Brene Brown says we're all responsible for our own bounce. And I love that. I love that quote because we can't control how people come at us, what type of feedback they give us, how we're being pushed by pressures from the outside, but we are responsible for our bounce. And that doesn't mean that we can fix everything by just changing our internal narrative about it, right? Like there are very real pressures. But it comes back to that body-based intelligence that we talked about. And it really starts with that moments of checking in, of curiosity. For me, who was a raging codependent, now recovering codependent in terms of just overly attuned to the external world for the first 25 years of my life, which if you're performance oriented, we kind of all have this, right? This attunement to external standards. It started with just trying to turn up the internal volume a little bit of saying, what do I need right now? How am I doing? And for a while, it was crickets in response. I mean, it was like, I actually don't know. I can't really hear it. But over time, I started to hear, I think you need a little bit of water. Like, oh, okay. Like I could drink some water. Like this was how simple it was for me and kind of coming back to my body. And then over time, that attunement becomes quicker. It becomes more natural. You become more skilled. And so that information kind of flow becomes a lot easier to say, how am I doing? And I also just want to say, this is not a solo sport. You need people in your life to say, hey, I'm noticing that you're showing up in this way. Or like for me, I come to my friends and say, if I ever act this way, you have full permission to come in and go, knock, knock, what is happening here? Right? And so we need that too. Like this is not a solo sport. It really comes down to having support network, having safe permissions of people to speak into your life, to call things out when you go into isolation. Hey, haven't heard from you for a while. How's it going? What's on your plate? Do you want to take a walk? Like we need that too.
It's a really special moment when you realize you've got friends like that. I really remember it when my brother was going through some health issues and I went into that complete isolate. I even moved out of London without telling her I was moving out of London. Like I lived with her and she was one of my best friends. Sorry, completely forgot to mention her. Mel is who we're talking about here.
The slow walker.
I'm like, my brain has skipped a few, but yeah, the slow walker, but the best person in the world. Love you, Mel. She's faster now. And she just messaged me and she sent me this podcast, which was exactly what I needed to listen to at the time. And rather than being like, why haven't I heard from you? You've been a shit friend, blah, blah, blah. Is, hey, I've noticed this. How are you? Here's something that made me think of you that I think may help you in this. And she waited until I'd come back and said, I'm not great. She almost waited for that to go, cool, now I'm going to give you something that might help, rather than just going, here's this, read this, you need to listen to this podcast because you're not in a good place right now, and push it on you. It was that. And that was when I sat back and I was like, I have really special people in my life. Haven't always. And sometimes there's been sprinkling of people amongst some people that have not been conducive to a happy and healthy life.
Yeah.
But when you have those people in your life, it's magic. And you are one of those people for me.
Same.
It's amazing to find them, but some people may not have them in their life. And this comes back again to setting boundaries and having that confidence in yourself of going, not my person, you're my person. How could you help someone who maybe feels like they have a few too many, we're going to use the word toxic here just for use of a better word. Yeah. But toxic people in their life that they would quite like to start pulling away from to step into this new era. Do you have any advice for people who might be in that position right now?
Do it.
Cut the cord, get the scissors.
I mean, there's so much we can dig in here, but I think the most important part of having a village is the willingness to be a villager. And so you cannot expect people, some people will, by the way, there are just these people out there in the world that will do this. But my philosophy is that I can't expect people to show up in my life when I hit those low moments if I'm not willing to be that person for them. And so you have to, it takes a long time, but you have to cultivate community. And also I just want to say, I think as women, because this level of intimacy and partnership in life through friendships is so much more socially normalized, I feel incredibly lucky that this is just seems to be more available to me than a lot of the men in my life who really want this and work really hard at it and have a harder time kind of cultivating that community. But I think you have to start by being willing to invest in relationships and put yourself out there. You got to trust that body intelligence that's coming up and saying, after every time I hang out with that person, I just feel off. I feel unsettled. I feel like I need to do something, or disconnected from myself, or more withdrawn. You have to notice how you feel after you're in the presence of people, and then say, what's that about? Is that my own narrative about that person, or is that really not a healthy connection for me, right? And so again, it all comes back to that body intelligence as a starting point, and then being willing to listen to it and try and refine it over time through your relationships.
If you had one piece of advice for your younger self, what would it be?
I just give her a hug to start. My gosh. I think it would be, we talked about that word curiosity, and I was lucky to have parents in my life who valued learning and authenticity over status and money as pursuits. And so I think they really encouraged me in this way, but I still felt so many pressures to perform and attune to all these standards for many, many years. I mentioned it earlier. I mean, there's a word for that. It's called codependency. And I think what I would have encouraged my younger self is just turn up that inner volume and be curious about that, and give yourself permission to follow the curiosity, which is a Liz Gilbert. She wrote Eat, Pray, Love. She talks about that. Don't follow your passions, follow your curiosity. And I think there's a playfulness about that and a release from pressure and external standards that is really healthy when you're still in the growing up and exploring phase.
I love that. You've been amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. This is such a joy.